It has been several months since the release of Wuthering Waves, and it has, unsurprisingly, stood the tests of time and remained relevant, even after the releases of Natlan and CSZ Zero. I myself have loyally stuck with Wuthering Waves for a multitude of reasons, from its rich and intriguing world, the smooth movement mechanics, and most obvious of all, the combat. I wholeheartedly believe Wuthering Waves has the best combat of all the gacha games that I myself have played. In this video, I'll be explaining just why I believe that to be the case, and then comparing it to 3 other games in the genre that I have experience with: Genshin Impact, Honkai Impact 3rd, and CSZ Zero. But without further ado, let's get into it. First of all, I believe it to be important to get the basics of the combat system out of the way. You play as a 3-man or woman team, with each character having their own basic attack, skill, ultimate, heavy attack, etc. Seems very basic so far. But what sets Wuthering Waves apart from other games in the genre is its intro and outro skill mechanic. Characters accumulate concerto energy over time of their rotation, and once full, they'll be able to perform an outro skill. The next character you switch into will trigger their intro skill. This is the driving force for all of your rotations. The game tells you you can swap off now, your job here is done. But unlike chain attacks in CSZ Zero, you are not forced to swap off. This is useful because you accumulate concerto energy by dodging, so if you get full concerto on your DPS before your damage window is over, you could just keep going. If you still want to keep playing your Changli, you are free to. This is mirrored by QTEs in Honkai Impact 3rd, but those are dependent on your character. QTEs have specific trigger conditions. This means that they are less free, and if you miss your QTE window, you'll lose time. The other part of intro and outro skills that is incredibly important, and in my opinion for the better, is that outro skills can provide incredibly large buffs. This means that concerto meter is important. If intro and outro skills were purely just another source of damage, then it would really just be overlooked. But thanks to it being a source of buffing, and one of the only ones by the way, it becomes really important to your rotation. So now that you understand how to play your characters, you might want to know why I think this game is so good compared to Genshin. After all, this game sounds pretty bland without elemental reactions, right? It sounds like ugh ugh, hit enemy and swap when concerto full. And to that I raise this question. What is the challenge in Genshin's gameplay? Seriously, what's the hard part? Genshin, for the most part, is a DPS check. The reaction system, that's just a team building check. Rotations are just memorization. Enemies don't challenge you. But Wuthering Waves, the challenge is present. Even with my S6 Jinshi, the enemies during Hologram 6 sometimes just catch me lacking. Enemies in this game are unrelenting. Imagine if every boss hit as hard as Coppelia and just did not stop attacking you. Some attacks from bosses like Scar or the Mech Abomination will even grab you and throw you around like a plaything. All this to say that dodging matters, and it's not just a defensive tool. Perfect dodges and counterattacks will also generate more concerto energy, so you're rewarded for dodging with faster rotations on your supports. Now, with good enough builds, you won't have that big of a problem in the Tower of Adversity, although I might be out of touch due to me playing the game a lot. But the game actively encourages skill-based gameplay, and this can also be seen through hologram bosses in some events. These bosses attack even faster, do more damage, and essentially require complete focus to defeat. It makes you engaged even if you're playing an easy team. Now let's compare this to other games, shall we? Starting with the biggest one, Genshin Impact. Genshin and Wuthering Waves present difficulty in entirely different ways. Whereas Wuthering Waves provides difficulty through mechanical skill, Genshin provides its challenge through knowledge. What you need to learn in Genshin is not how to play the game, rather it's how to build an effective team. However, in recent times, this has become more simplified than ever, essentially removing the most interesting part of the game. They did this by making characters revolve around specific reactions, which makes it incredibly easy to find a team for them because the game essentially tells you what to run. You would be fool to grab a Kinich and then not use a Pyro character. Even when this does not happen, Genshin's supports have become so integral to their specific teams that you can almost always just guess what the team uses near instantly. An attack scaling Anemo DPS? Bennett Farazan Farina, you know? And also, a lot of recent supports have consolidated like 4 or 5 roles at a time, meaning that you don't have to decide what to use, because the answer of what to use is incredibly obvious. And then once you have built your team, you find out that you can't even use them because, Hoyo put a dumbass shield in the abyss which forces you to use a specific element, which at times can limit your options to an incredible degree. Specific bosses like the Gold Wolf Lord and even just abyss lectors make this an incredible annoyance when it comes to your freedom of team building. This means that we're back to relying on mechanical depth, which Genshin doesn't really offer. Where Wuthering Waves' enemies have unrelenting attacks that should almost always be dodged, Genshin enemies rarely match it, and even when they do, it's only triggered like once every 30 seconds at best. Think of the Yumkasor King's Fire Breath. Dodging is practically the same as Wuthering Waves, but with no offensive benefits other than just not getting knocked over. Then there's the matter of supports. In Wuthering Waves, they have rotations that you either make faster or mess up, adding another layer. Whereas Genshin? EQ. Wuthering Waves rewards you for skillful gameplay, whereas Genshin does not. Then, let's compare it to the next game, Zenless Zone Zero. Now, I will say that I do not have as much experience with CSZ, so if I say something wrong, that is entirely on me. But based on what I have played, the mechanics seem similar to Wuthering Waves, but handled in a way that I believe to be worse. They both have perfect dodges, parry mechanics, a 3-man party system, and certain systems that encourage swapping between characters. But the combat encounters entirely differentiate the two of them. And I believe the main flaw is in one thing: telegraphing. Enemies in Wuthering Waves have clear animations when they're preparing to kick your ass, and in ZZZ, they really don't. Enemy attacks are very hard to see, especially if you're so focused on dealing damage. You really gotta just take a guess on when to dodge at times. Next up, ZZZ doesn't encourage dodging in the same way as Wuthering Waves. In ZZZ, a dodge is a damage tool for some characters like Jane Doe and Nekomata, but for most it's just a way to avoid damage. And as I've said many times before, this is opposed to Wuthering Waves, granting you faster rotations for dodging. Next up, your rotations in ZZZ are entirely dependent on the enemy. Let me explain. Both of the team archetypes, Anomaly and Crit, have reliance on a mechanic that is tied to the enemy you're attacking. Crit DPSs really can't get their damage window in if the enemy isn't stunned, so first you need to use your stunner before you go into your DPS. Anomaly carries need to build up Anomaly, which is less offensive than Daze, but it's still annoying. This is fine on paper since you need to get up supports in every gacha, but because Daze is applied to an enemy, if the enemy dies before you get your Daze or Anomaly off, you kinda wasted your time. Wuthering Waves' design makes it a lot more free to play your rotations in a way that you want, whereas ZZZ forces you into a certain playstyle. It's also not as mechanically challenging. One of my friends who literally hadn't even played ZZZ before this point, when she got access to an endgame account, managed to defeat the endgame first try. And now finally Honkai Impact 3rd. I won't harper on it for too long because this is nowhere near as popular, but it has everything that I like about wuwa. It rewards skill and has in-depth combat. The issue? The game modes suck. Everything is a speedrun contest against other people, and characters are blatantly dysfunctional without all their gear. So Honkai Impact 3rd combat is good, but everything around it is so bad that it's not even worth engaging with. But it's not just about the combat system itself. It's also about how the system are utilized within character kits. And when you make a good mechanic, that's really not the end of the job. If your characters do not interact with these mechanics in a satisfying or rewarding way, what's the point? So I'm going to talk about some of my favorite characters to use and why. First on the list, my main who I got to S6, Jinshi. While her playstyle is quite simplistic, it's the mechanics of her kit that are so intriguing to me. First of all, the way her kit is made encourages half rotations. Now, what's a half rotation? Essentially what it means is only doing parts of your rotation instead of fully resetting to squeeze out a bit more DPS. This is possible thanks to two things: Jinshi's Eras of Unity effect and her insanely short field time. Jinshi's DPS window is only about 5 seconds, whereas most DPS characters can go for as long as 10 or even 14 seconds. Her Eras of Unity effect also gives her a free outro skill, which also means a free intro skill on another character. This combination of mechanics leads to your rotation involving swapping in a Genji and your sub DPS twice, but your healer only once, which is good for your overall DPS. Next up, I want to talk about the guy that I pull out when I want to play a fair fight, but I don't want to completely lock in. Jiyan. Jiyan is perhaps the easiest character to play in the game, and yet he still manages to create depth thanks to the flexibility of rotations of Wuthering Waves. His biggest problem is his massive energy regen needs, but thanks to intro skills, there is a good workaround for this. Intro skills provide quite a substantial amount of energy, so by sacrificing another party member's intro skill to use a second one on Jiyan, you're able to slash your ER needs by 30%. Finding this out honestly saved my Jiyan's build, and I'm literally on 106% ER. And then finally, the two characters I play when I lock in. I'm grouping these two together because I play them together. That's right, it's the Changli and Shangliao dual carry team. As opposed to other gachas, dual carry is a very good option in Wuthering Waves thanks to swap cancelling. What that means is you can swap out of your character mid-animation, and they'll just keep going, essentially giving you 2 DPSs for the field time of 1, or usually 1.5 since swap cancels are never perfect. Changli and Shangliao both have very long-lasting but powerful skills that are easily swap cancelable. Changli's skill, True Sight attacks and Enhance Heavy Attack, and then Shangliao's skill and Plunge. The swap cancel team are also very high skill ceiling, making them an excellent form of skill expression. Ultimately, I think Wuthering Waves' combat is even stronger thanks to how its party system works. A lot of games saw Genshin's success and chose to copy its 4-man party system, but I'm honestly glad Wuthering Waves did not. In a game where supports have rotations that aren't just EQ, rotations should always be within a certain length, and if it's over 30 seconds, it means that you're usually not swapping characters enough, which can lead to their inputs getting stale. But if it's shorter than around 17 seconds, it usually means that characters are being swapped too fast, which means you really don't have the time to properly adjust. The 3-character party gets you within this range pretty comfortably. Having only 3 party members also makes rotations more straightforward, as opposed to with 4 characters, as there's less moving parts. This also forces Kuro Games to consolidate the roles of sub-DPS and damage buffer, meaning a new sub-DPS will always have a niche because their outro skill is always going to buff something specific, which means it's going to take a long time for them to get power cracked in that specific scenario. I think the combat in Wuthering Waves encourages players into skillful play while not downright requiring it, and in my opinion, this is the best way to handle combat systems. There are some people who believe games need to challenge you, whereas others believe challenge should be entirely optional, both of which are fair takes, but I think that balance is key. That's why I believe Wuthering Waves has perfected the combat system in the genre, as it does everything it needs to, encourage you to interact with its systems, and give you the freedom to find specific ways you enjoy playing. But what do you think of the combat? Do you agree with me that it has the best combat out of all the games I compared it to or not? Be sure to tell me why in the comments below, and while you're there, may as well subscribe and like the video. If you want to get into a discussion with me, the best place to do that would be my Discord or my Twitter, both of which are linked in the description. But that'll be all from me. Peace.